Okay, welcome back from break, everyone. Nice to see you guys here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share this topic of the 5 Precepts, a householder's guide to daily practice. We're going to use the words of the Buddha here so that you guys can see what the Buddha taught. And then I'm going to teach it to you how to relate it to your day-to-day life and applying it in your day-to-day life, because that's where the real benefit comes in. You know, you need to intellectually learn it, which is what I'll help you with in class today. But then you're going to need to apply it in your day-to-day life, and that's where the real improvement comes from. These are essentially 5 impactful decisions that if you make them wisely, you'll experience wholesome results. But if you make them unwisely, it'll produce unwholesome results for you. And what you are going to come to understand is when the Buddha is explaining these 5 precepts, what he's teaching you is this natural law of Kamma. Once again, not karma, but I don't use that word, but it's essentially referring to the same thing. I use the word Kamma, but this isn't punishments and rewards. It's not anything mystical or magical or anything like that. It's helping you to be able to see that when you make certain decisions wisely, it will produce wholesome results. And when you make unwise decisions, it will produce unwholesome results. This is the cause and effect, or action and result. It's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. And everything you decide is going to produce some kind of result. And when you have wisdom of the natural law, then you can make wise decisions. So the Buddha is going to share with you 5 things that, using his words, about how to make these wise decisions around these 5 different areas. And I'm going to show you what the words of the Buddha are, and then I'm going to help you to relate it to your day-to-day life and how to implement it in your day-to-day life. As we go, just like always, you're welcome to ask questions either here at the temple or online. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So here's the words of the Buddha on this first precept. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick, sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. Everything the Buddha is teaching you is to help you eliminate these poisons or these pollutions that I talked about, the 10 fetters, but bubbling up as the 3 poisons or 3 unwholesome roots. This particular precept is helping you to eliminate central desire, which is craving, desire, attachment, and it's helping you to eliminate anger, hatred, and ill will. Because to kill a living being, there needs to be a certain amount of ill will in the mind, a certain amount of anger to deprive that being of its life. So the Buddha is teaching you here to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. But notice he's not saying preserve all life at all costs, right? That would be one side. And that's not what he's saying. This isn't black and white where he's saying preserve all life at all costs. He's saying live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Well, when you're examining and investigating the teachings of the Buddha, when you're learning them, anytime there's something that you don't understand, you should dig into it to try to understand it so you can cultivate wisdom around it. So when you see a precept like this, you can see he's teaching something about living beings. So the first thing you should ask yourself is, what is a living being? Well, the Buddha has a teaching on this to help you understand what a living being is. It's referred to as the 5 aggregates, and I'll introduce you to it. What the 5 aggregates are 5 elements or 5 collections of what is a living being. Essentially, a living being is going to have 5 things. It's going to have physical form, and you can reflect on this as I'm sharing it with you because you know you're a living being. A living being is going to have physical form, right? You're going to have physical form. You're going to have feelings. You're going to have perceptions, which are like views and opinions about the world. You're going to have decisions, or which called volitional formations, choices and decisions. And then you're going to have a consciousness or a mind. These are the 5 aggregates, or the 5 collections, or the 5 elements: form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. So it's physical form, it's feelings in your mind, pleasant, painful, neither painful nor pleasant. Then there's going to be perceptions, like views and opinions about the world, the way you look out at the world. Then there's going to be volitional formations, or choices and decisions, free will. And then there's going to be a consciousness or a mind. So you can see that you have that. And you can also see that other living beings have it too, like a squirrel, a rabbit, a snake. They all have these 5 aggregates. But then you can take this a step further to investigate it and reflect on it to independently verify it, is take something that you know isn't a living being, like this chair that I'm sitting in. Ask yourself, does it have physical form? It does, right? It has physical form. Does it have feelings? Doesn't have feelings, right? Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Doesn't have those, right? Does it have choices and decisions? Can it choose to pick itself up and relocate itself somewhere? Doesn't have those, right? And it doesn't have a consciousness. It doesn't have a mind. And that's why this isn't a living being, right? So you can independently verify this with all the different things in the world. Now, sometimes people have challenges with the 5 aggregates and you're just starting to learn them. So I kind of give this little bit of a shorthand way to think about it, but this isn't the natural laws. The Buddha taught the natural law. This is just a way to help you start thinking in the direction of the 5 aggregates, which is a living being is typically going to come from an egg, a sperm, and there's going to be a consciousness, but not in all situations, right? This is just a kind of a shorthand way to think of it. The challenge is, though, in the unenlightened state, we use language that relates to things and calls things alive, or that we're killing something that isn't actually a living being. Sometimes people say that they're killing a tree or they're killing a plant, or you might say you're killing a bacteria or you're killing a virus or you're killing a fungus or something like this. But you can't actually kill these things because they're not actually alive in the true sense of the word based on the 5 aggregates. We oftentimes think of plants as being alive, but they don't have all 5 aggregates. This is why what we're truly doing is we're harvesting a plant. Right? That's what we're actually doing. We're not killing it because it's not a living being. Or when we're eliminating a bacteria from the body, we're eliminating it from the body. We're not killing it because it's not a living being. It doesn't have all 5 aggregates. So the challenge in the unenlightened state is oftentimes we use language that doesn't truly represent true reality. We're speaking in ways that is unwise. So what you would like to do is always speak the truth and refer to things in a way that is actually accurate. So once you start learning what a living being is, you might not be able to say, I'm going to kill this tree, because you're not actually killing the tree. You're harvesting it, or you're harvesting that broccoli, or you're eliminating the bacteria or virus from your body. You're not actually killing it. So what you will come to understand is, as you're learning this precept from the Buddha, the reason why he's teaching you not to kill living beings, and that would be unwise to do so, is because anytime you're causing harm to others, this harm will come back to you. So if you have anger, hatred, and ill will in your mind, and then it becomes unskillful where you're going around and killing living beings, those living beings are now experiencing that harm, and that harm will come back to you. So if you went out on the street, for example, and started trying to kill people, people are going to come after you. People are going to start trying to hurt you. Right? This is the cause and effect of the unwise decision. So you would need to ask yourself, if you're practicing this precept closely, is would you do any of these things? And it's not always black and white, right? Like euthanasia of a human or an animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, any government-sponsored killing, or murder. These are all intentional killings. But whether you choose to do these things or not, it's your choice. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. It's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. And it's not black and white. There's not a situation where in all cases it would be necessarily wise to do it one particular way. And there's not a situation where in all cases it would be wise to do it another particular way. Always keep in mind that it's your choice and your decision to do any of these things. But I'm going to just take a couple of these and kind of walk you through and show you how there's this gray area that you're going to need to learn how to navigate. Let's take one like termination of a pregnancy. Oftentimes people think of this as a political issue. I don't think of it that way. I think of it as a human issue, that this is a medical technology that we have. And there's some situations where it could be very wise for someone to terminate a pregnancy. And there could be some situations where it might be unwise. But ultimately, for a person who is choosing or thinking about terminating a pregnancy, it's their choice. It's not my choice. It's not anybody else's choice. It's everybody's choice to make their own decisions. And if somebody came to me and asked for consultation and guidance of whether they should terminate a pregnancy or not, I wouldn't tell them yes or no. It's up to them. I would say, if you terminate it, here's what you'll experience based on the natural law of Kamma. And if you don't terminate it, here's what you'll experience. And then it's up to the individual to be able to decide for themselves whether or not they would like to terminate a pregnancy or not. But let me give you a couple of scenarios where you can understand what the Buddha is describing when he says living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Whenever you're practicing loving kindness and compassion, it always starts with you. You need to have loving kindness and compassion for this being who you are. If you don't have loving kindness and compassion for this being, then you can't really have that for other beings either. So in an example where maybe a woman is pregnant and maybe we know through medical technology that this baby isn't ever going to live outside the womb, it's not going to be a viable human being, and it's threatening the life of the woman, it could be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings for someone to choose to terminate that pregnancy. Again, whether someone does that or not, it's that person's choice, and it's up to that person to decide for themselves. But in this situation, they would be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because if they allowed that pregnancy to continue, it would be threatening their own life and they could die themselves. And allowing this to continue and actually die themselves would not be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. But in a situation where maybe somebody's practicing casual sex, they're having sex with lots of different people, they're regularly getting pregnant, maybe 5, 6, 8 times, they're having abortions or terminating pregnancies, this is causing harm to living beings, and now it's going to cause harm to their body too. They're going to experience these unwholesome results of having these regular termination of pregnancies. Again, whether that person chooses to do that or not, it's up to them. It's not up to me to decide for them what they should or shouldn't be doing. But this is the cause and effect, or the action and result, the natural law of Kamma, that in one situation, a person is going to be negatively affected based on the health of their body, having regular termination of pregnancy, where another person, they're making this decision based in loving kindness and compassion for this being who they are, and now maybe they're doing that once in a lifetime, and now they're doing it in order to preserve their own health. So this is the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. But remember, this is the natural law of Kamma, that it's functioning much higher than human laws. So let's take something like war, right? A human law could be that a country says, hey, we want you to go over there and kill those people in that country, and go over there and murder those people and kill those people, and we're not going to prosecute you for murder. If you come back home here, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. If you kill people in our country, we're going to prosecute you for murder and you're going to go to jail. But if you kill those people over there, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. This is a human law, and this is imperfect, right? And this is why oftentimes when people go off to war, they get killed themselves, right? They have a shortened lifespan, or at the very least, they might get addicted to drugs and alcohol, or they might come back from the war and they have a lot of troubles and difficulties integrating into society, or they might even commit suicide. This is the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, that maybe the humans can say, yeah, go over there and kill those people in that country. We're completely okay with that. But if you kill people here, we'll arrest you. The natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, if you go off into that country and killing other people, your mind's going to be negatively affected by that. And the results of that is that you can experience difficulties integrating into society. You can have difficulties with finances and acquiring basic necessities that you need. You can have mental challenges where maybe you're even potentially committing suicide. And at the height of this, you can actually be killed and murdered yourself when you go away into war, because you're causing harm to others. This harm is coming to you. So this natural law is not the human laws that we function by from our governments. If you're learning and practicing the natural law of Kamma, it's a much higher law, and you'll never have any issues with your government. If you understand the natural law of Kamma, you're going to be practicing a much higher natural law than what humans are creating. So the human laws are imperfect, and we should always aspire to make those better and better. But because human beings are involved, human beings have craving, anger, and ignorance in their mind, they're going to be making mistakes in the way that they create laws, the way that they administer them and enforce them. So again, we should always aspire for those to be better and better, but there's always going to be inherent mistakes in the laws that we create. But if you learn and practice this natural law of Kamma, it's a perfect law that's functioning and affecting all of us, whether we're aware of it or not. So the more you're aware of it, then you can make wise decisions that will help you to navigate the world and experience wholesome results. So there's all these different intentional killings that you'll need to consider and think about whenever you're experiencing any particular situation. Here's another situation. Say your house is infested with termites, right? And now these insects are destroying the home, right? And now you're trying to practice this precept of living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Well, if you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, maybe what you do is you do a bit of research online and see if there's a way to eradicate these termites without killing them, right? And what you might come back with is, no, there's not. There's not a way to do that. And now you might need to hire somebody to come and exterminate these termites. And this would still be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because if you allow those termites to eat up your home, then you and the other people in the home aren't going to have a place to live. So notice the Buddha isn't teaching preserve all life at all cost. That's not what he's teaching. That would be one side of the spectrum. But over here on the other side, where you just went around haphazardly killing everybody and everything that you encountered, this would be not where you would like to be. But there's this middle way where you live compassionately and you put thought behind what it is that you're doing. Unfortunately, animals, they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being. As a human being, we would know to go out into the forest and eat the trees that are in the forest because that's not causing any harm to anybody, right? We harvest those things. We wouldn't go onto someone's property and start cutting down trees and harming their property. But these termites, they don't have that level of consciousness. And because they're causing harm, now this harm comes to them, right? And now they're going to need to be reborn in order to experience an improved existence and ultimately be able to get to enlightenment and have a better ability to make wise decisions. So this is how you live compassionately. It doesn't mean you preserve all life at all costs. It means you're thinking through the things that you're doing. Say you're in your home and you're sleeping. Maybe it's 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, and someone breaks in, right? They break in 2 a.m. in the morning. You hear them coming in through the window. I guarantee you they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers. Right? They're not bringing you chocolate and flowers at 2 a.m. in the morning, breaking into your house, right? They're there to do harm. So what I advise students to do is, if you can, just get out, right? Get out, go call the police, let the police come and deal with it. They have the training, they have the tools, they have the techniques, they can deal with the situation. But there's no permanent decision here, right? Because in all situations, you're not going to be able to get out. You might look outside and there's a fire outside, right? Or maybe there's a gang of people outside. Or maybe the person snuck up on you and you're backed up into a corner. You might not be able to get out. So the Buddha's teachings is not about here's a thing that's going to happen and always do it this way, because that would be permanence. You're going to need to think through your decisions. Moving to this enlightened mental state is to move to a higher consciousness where you're taking in the variables and understanding what's going on around you. And then you're using the wisdom that you've cultivated in order to make wise decisions that is going to produce wholesome results. So in this situation, if you have someone breaking into your home at 2 or 3 a.m., you're going to need to have a calm mind and you're going to need to think through your decisions. And the first thing I would consider is, can I get out? Right? If I can get out, hey, let them break whatever they're going to break, let them steal whatever they're going to steal, I'm out of here, right? You'd like to preserve your life. That would be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. But if you are backed up in a corner and this person's coming at you with a knife or something like that, it wouldn't be to live compassionately to just sit there and let them stab you and kill this being. So if you needed to get a baseball bat or a bigger knife or something else in order to protect yourself, you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. You're protecting this being who you are. And any harm that comes to that person, that's a result of their decisions. They decided to break into your house at 2 or 3 a.m. And now because they're trying to inflict harm on this being is now inflicting harm there. But what I would suggest you do is cause the least amount of harm as possible. If they have like a stick, get a bigger stick, right? Get like a baseball bat or something if you have one of those, right? If they have a knife, okay, maybe you need to get a knife or a gun or something like this. But if they just have fists and that's all they have and you can take care of it with your fist, okay, but maybe you're smaller and you can't do that. Maybe they're bigger than you. Maybe you need some tool to help you. But in this situation, that's why people are understanding that, yeah, this harm was coming to you, you took care of it, and now that person received that harm because of the harm they're inflicting. So you're going to need to think through these decisions. It's not plug and play. It's not a decision tree that if this happens, do this. And if this happens, do that, right? You're going to need to think through all your decisions based on your wisdom. But you would like to cause the least amount of harm as possible in a situation where you're having defense or protection. Sometimes students ask me about do not resuscitate orders. I don't know if you guys know what this is. Some countries have this. It's called a DNR, where you're alive now, you can go sign a legal document that says, if this body dies, don't bring me back to life. Don't use medical technology to bring me back. And if somebody's done this, this isn't opposite of this precept because you haven't actually killed any being. So if you have a DNR, or you're interested in having a DNR, you can do that and it's still living compassionately because you haven't killed anything. You haven't intentionally killed anything. Instead, you're saying, I'm comfortable with death. You don't need to use medical technology to bring me back to life. And then some people ask me about consuming animal products and whether or not they should be vegan. This is a choice for you, just like everything in life. It's your choice of what you choose to do. But what you will find is that if you're eating animal products and you're basing your life in animal products, there's harm that's being caused to these animals. And now you're using that in order to sustain your life, and you'll experience unwholesome results because of this. So when you're eating meat, you're not just eating the flesh of the animal, you're also eating drugs and hormones and toxins that are in those animals, and now it's going to cause harm and less health in your body. We have enough research now that they've taken wild salmon out of very clean rivers in places like America, and they've tested the flesh, and they found substances like cocaine, antidepressants, and things like this in the flesh of the meat. And this is because human beings are flushing this down the toilet, and it's polluting the water table. And now this one particular study, they found over 80 substances in the flesh of the wild fish. So even farmed animals are having this, where they're putting hormones into farmed animals. I don't know if you guys are aware, but some women are actually having their menstrual cycle as early as 5 years old now. And this is because of the hormones that they're ingesting through the farmers wanting to grow their animals really quick because they can make more money. And now the human beings are eating that, and they're eating the hormones. And now it's producing a speeding up of growth and development in the body, where women, even at the age of 5, are having their menstrual cycle sometimes, right? My son at the age of 8 had more hair on his legs than I had when I was like 14, because at one time he used to eat meat. So you can see this speeding up of the growth of the body from this kind of stuff. And you can see more sickness and illness in the body. So if or when you would ever like to switch over to plant-based food supply, you'll see more wholesome results because of the cause and effect. Because you're not participating in the killing of animals, you'll see improved health in the body and in the mind as well, because you're not ingesting those drugs and toxins and hormones that you're now maybe living on a plant-based food supply. So these are all things for you to consider. And it's up to you to decide when or if you're ever going to address any of these things. I'm just sharing with you there's this cause and effect, or action and result, in any decisions that you're making around killing of living beings. So do you guys have any questions on any of this? Looks like Jacob has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, David. That was very interesting. Let me just lower my hand. I got a question because I don't understand the part why it's the plants are not alive, because they coming from pollen, like we coming from sperm. They eating and breathing just like us, then growing, communicating just like us, but not in a verbal way. They communicating through chemicals, and then they actually have a brain as well. And it's not looking like our brain, but it's located in the roots. And that's how they can communicate between other plants and bacteria. So I don't understand why plants are not living beings in a Buddhism, because obviously they can communicate, they breathe, they eat, they grow, die, they have a living self inside them. And so why they would be classified as not living being if they have certain consciousness inside their roots, where their brain is, because they can learn as well, just like we can learn, they can learn. So could you explain me that, please?
Sure. What I would encourage you to do, Jacob, is look closely at the 5 aggregates so that you understand what those are, and then look closely at plants, because what you're describing isn't actually true, that all those things about the plants having a brain and all these other things, it isn't actually true. They don't have all 5 aggregates. So you're going to need to study the 5 aggregates closely, which is understanding physical form, feelings, perceptions, choices and decisions or volitional formations, and a consciousness. And you can see that a plant doesn't have all 5 of these things. And right now, you're maybe believing that the plant has certain things like this, but there's no independently verifiable evidence of what you just described. So you're going to need to understand more about the 5 aggregates and then look objectively, not based on your views and opinions that you have right now that your mind might be holding on to, but look at plants objectively so you can see that they don't have all 5 aggregates. They do have physical form, but they don't have any of the other 4 aggregates.
But I actually base that on the research, on the teaching. This is not my opinion. This has been proven scientifically that the plants communicate. You can go and research that there is a plant communication, and they actually do make decisions, and that's been proven as well scientifically. This is not my idea. This is not my belief. This has been proven scientifically, and so I'm the only thing that I cannot that didn't been proved so far. It's feelings out of all of these 5, but for the rest, what you described, it's been already proven scientifically, and you can actually research that.
I would disagree with you, Jacob.
This is not my personal belief.
Jacob, I would disagree with you. And as I mentioned, I would encourage you to look more closely at the 5 aggregates and then look objectively at plants, because right now what you're saying isn't actually true. So I would encourage you to go look at that more closely. Right now, I'm not going to be able to walk you through that, but there's resources that I share that can help you with that. And if you'd like to talk privately about it, I'll surely help you, but you're going to need to be willing to penetrate into it and look deeper than what it is that you currently think that you understand.
Yes, I have researches as well that
I'm going to go ahead and mute you, Jacob, because right now you're just sharing a bunch of your views and opinions, and I need to move on into the rest of the class. So thank you for your question, but if you could talk about this offline, this would be much better. So we're going to move to this next precept, which is the second precept. Here's the words of the Buddha. It's abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So what the Buddha is teaching you here is, like I have in the first bullet, which is do not steal. And the reason why he's teaching you this is because anytime you take something from somebody, you're causing harm to that individual. So we can't cause other people to be discontent, but we can cause harm to others. And the difference is, what discontentedness is this is the pleasant feelings, the painful feelings, the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. These are conditioned feelings. When we cause harm to others, we're causing harm to their physical body, like injuring them or killing them. We can cause harm to someone's material possessions, or we can cause harm to their reputation. And when we're causing harm to someone's physical body, to their material possessions, or their reputation, this is going to result in the harm coming back to us. So the Buddha is teaching you here to not cause harm through stealing. And the reason why is because once you steal from somebody, harm's going to come to you. And any kind of stealing that someone might do, this is coming from our craving, our desire, our attachment. The mind says, I want that. I don't have the ability to get that myself, so I'm just going to steal it from this person. So if I stole somebody's car, I'm causing that person harm. They now can't go to work and make money. They can't take their children to school, perhaps, if they have children. They can't go to acquire basic necessities like at a grocery store or something like this to sustain their life. So I've now caused that person harm. And now I'm driving around in this car. I'm likely to be arrested, yes, if I get caught. But also, I could get beat up, I could get injured, I could even get murdered if this person sees me driving their car. These are all things that can happen to you as a result of stealing. And at the very least, people will likely steal from you too. So anytime you're causing harm to others, harm will come back to you. And one of the things that we could cause harm is to someone's physical body, to their material possessions, or to their reputation. And this is something you would like to avoid. And the Buddha is helping you to see this cause and effect, or this action and result, that it would be wise to not steal from people. But also, you can think about assuming something can be taken or used. One of the examples that I give here is, like, say you're in a college class and you're turning in a paper, and you're bringing this paper into the class, and maybe the professor is outside the class, and you see the stapler on their desk, and maybe you just assume that it can be used, and you start stapling the paper. And now if the professor walks in and sees that you're stapling the paper, maybe this professor being attached to their stapler is like, "Hey, what are you doing? You're using my stapler." And you're like, oh, if you just assume that you could use it, now this person's getting angry. They're getting frustrated because they're having a craving, desire, attachment. And they're falsely attributing those feelings to you. And they think that you're causing them to be angry. So now you might get a failing grade on that paper. Or they might fail you in the entire class, right? This is the unwholesome results. So what the Buddha is doing is he's teaching you how to protect your mind and protect your decisions and navigate the world of all these unenlightened beings. That if you just assume that things could be taken, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where somebody's attached to something, and now they're going to get angry and frustrated because you're now using something without their permission. So it's wise to ask questions and say, "Hey, do you mind if I use your stapler?" And if the professor says yes, great, use the stapler. If they say no, then okay, go find it somewhere else, right? Maybe another professor has a stapler you could use, or maybe you go buy one somewhere, right? So you're not interested in assuming that something can be used or taken. Also, notice that the Buddha here says accepting what is given. What that's about is that when people are practicing generosity with you and they're giving and sharing, it's helping to enhance the quality of their mind because they're eliminating craving, desire, attachment, like we were talking about in the last discussion. So if somebody's offering you something, the Buddha teaches you to accept it. And this would be a wise thing to do because it's helping to enhance the quality of that person's mind. So if grandma is giving you that sweater and you know you'll never ever wear that sweater ever, the Buddha teaches you to accept it. Right? Just accept it. That's helping grandma's mind. But now you can practice generosity. You can give it to somebody else. And if grandma gets angry because you didn't wear her sweater and you gave it away to somebody else, grandma's causing that anger herself because she isn't practicing pure generosity. Because with generosity, you're giving and sharing without any expectation of anything in return. Well, if her expectation is that you will wear that sweater and you don't wear it and she gets angry, her mind is causing that anger herself. So you could perhaps practice generosity to give that sweater away. And it might go through 5, 6, 10 different hands. And eventually it's going to find somebody that says, "That's the most beautiful sweater that I've ever seen, and I'm going to wear it every single day. Oh, this is so beautiful," right? So now there's all this chain of people that were practicing generosity, and there's all this benefit in the world. But remember, these teachings, they're not black and white. If someone offers you heroin or cocaine, are you going to accept that? It would be very unwise for you to accept that. Right? So the Buddha isn't teaching you, always do it this way or never do it this way. He's helping you to be able to understand that, hey, it's wise to accept people's generosity because it's helping them to enhance their mind. And if you just shut down people's generosity, what you're going to find is people aren't willing to give you things. People aren't going to share with you. So by you just accepting people's generosity, it helps enhance their mind and it helps to maintain your relationship. But you're going to need to have a higher consciousness that if somebody's giving you something and maybe this thing is unwholesome, or maybe that person has expectations that if I give you this, you're going to give me that. Maybe you're not interested in accepting that gift, right? So this is where you're going to need to think through the decisions that you're making and decide what's wise. And then lastly, he talks about here, awaiting what is given. What he's talking about here is that instead of putting your expectations on somebody, of that they will give you something, just await what is given. Like say you have a life partner who's going on a holiday, instead of loading them up with expectations like get me this and get me this and get me this and get me that, now that person's burdened with your expectations going around their trip and trying to bring you back these things that you asked for. Instead, the Buddha is teaching you just await what is given rather than having expectations of other people. Because now when this person comes back and they don't have what you wanted, you'll be upset. You'll be frustrated because of your expectations. So you can just let all that go. So any questions here on this second precept? The abandoning of taking what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given without stealing. The questions here? Okay. So the second question here, the third precept is all about sexual misconduct. For those of you guys that we studied yesterday, the Eightfold Path, and in the Eightfold Path, there was that right action where the Buddha was talking about sexual misconduct. Here's where he fully explains it. So I'm going to read it to you, and then I'll show you how to apply it in your day-to-day life. He says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father, mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So there's lots of things that he's talking about here. The one where he's talking about abandoning sexual relations with a woman or man who are protected by their family, essentially, he's talking about having sex with minors, right? Because our sexual activity, we can actually cause harm with it. And if we're having sex with a minor, like an 8 or 12-year-old child, this child is being raised and developed and their mind is still growing. And if we choose to have sex with that person, now it takes them away from their family and the growth and development that they're doing at home. So the Buddha teaches us not to do that. And in most places in the world, the human laws match to this. But there are some places where it's not illegal to have sex with a child. But if you look at those kinds of places, if you look at their society and their economic situation and their political situation, they're having a lot of difficulties and a lot of challenges because all these young beings are having sex so early in life and their mind is being impacted by it. And as they're becoming adults, they don't have the wisdom in their community to be able to run their society in a way that's beneficial for all beings. So this is the natural law of Kamma that the Buddha is describing, and most human laws are structured that way for this particular aspect, but not all of them. So this is where you can understand the natural law of Kamma. Also, where the Buddha is saying whose violation entails a penalty, this is where you would not be interested in having sex without consent. If you had sex without consent, this would be forcibly trying to convince somebody to have sex, maybe raping them and having sex against their will. And this is causing harm to that person, and this is where harm can come back to you. Where the Buddha is talking about abandoning unchastity, this is like having sex with multiple partners. If you understand what chastity is, I don't know if you guys understand this word. Back in ancient times, fathers would have their daughters wear what's called a chastity belt. There was this metal underwear that only the father had the lock and key to. I can't imagine walking around with metal underwear, but this is what girls would do, is the father would put these metal underwear on their daughter and they would have a lock and key. This is called a chastity belt. That means you're not having sex with anybody, right? Well, unchastity would be just the opposite, where you're just having sex with lots and lots and lots and lots of people, right? And if you're doing this, it's your choice, of course, but there's going to be unwholesome results, right? There's going to be potentially sexually transmitted diseases that occur. That's the unwholesome results that we get from unchastity. There can be fights and arguments. You can get injured. Somebody else could be having sex with that same person as you, and now they get angry and frustrated at you, and they attack you. People have even been murdered over this kind of thing, of having sex with multiple partners. So these are things that you would like to look at. In some cultures, as you meet a partner, you might actually ask your family, can we move in together and start our life here? Then we're going to save up some money and go buy our own house. And in this situation, the relatives have actually agreed that, yes, you guys can move in. And they understand that sex is part of this, potentially. So in this situation, you're still practicing this precept. So this is something that the relationship has been accepted by the family members. So that's not what the Buddha is talking about here when he's talking about people who are protected by their mother, father, and their family, essentially. Because in this situation, the family has accepted this relationship and agreed that, yes, you can move in together to our house. Where the Buddha is saying who are protected by teachings, this is sex with someone who's decided to remain celibate. As you're making your way to enlightenment, you might ultimately get to a point where you decide that you're no longer going to have sex. This is something that some people choose to do as they're moving into the third or fourth stage of enlightenment. And if you've chosen to not have sex, if somebody were to lure you away from that or try to entice you away from that, that's causing harm. Because one of the best things that could ever happen for a community is for somebody to get to enlightenment. If somebody in the community has gotten to enlightenment, this is very helpful for everybody in the community, because now more and more people will understand the wisdom of how to get to enlightenment. So if we lure somebody away from their celibacy, this is hindering them from being able to get to enlightenment, and now it's causing harm to the community. So here in Thailand, they make it easy for you so that you know, like ordained practitioners wearing the robes, they're choosing not to have sex with anybody. And oftentimes in Thailand, when people are wearing all white, they're also choosing not to have sex with anybody. So I don't wear all white because I'm trying to advertise that I don't have sex with other people, because it doesn't matter what somebody does, I'm not going to have sex in that any situation. But for me, I wear white clothes for other reasons, but there are people that wear white clothes because they're not having sex. And I don't have sex any longer, but that's not the reason why I wear white clothes. But for some people, they are wearing white clothes to help others to know, hey, I'm not having sex. So if you're interested in having sex, you would like to find somebody who's willing to also have sex, right? Because that way you're not causing harm. Then sex with people who are already committed in other relationships, or sex outside of any relationship you are committed to. Again, people have been injured, beat up, murdered, sexually transmitted diseases. This is unchastity, and this is why that's being experienced. Whether somebody chooses to do that or not, it's up to them. But the Buddha is explaining to you this natural law of cause and effect so that you can see it more and more clearly. And then sex with people who are human trafficked, that's also unchastity, that someone's being forced to have sex, and now there might be a payment involved. And if you're having sex with that person, it's causing harm. And this is where if you go into those environments, you could potentially get beat up or murdered. You can get robbed. You can get sexually transmitted diseases. These are all unwholesome results or unwholesome kamma that's coming back to you from making the unwise decision to go into that environment and have sex. Some additional ones here, paid services. It's very similar to human trafficking, but in paid services, maybe this person is willing to do this and they're doing it willingly, but still you can get robbed, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get sexually transmitted diseases. There's all kinds of challenges there. Notice that the Buddha doesn't talk about same-gender relationships when he talks about sexual misconduct. And the reason why is because there's no harm. If there's two loyal, loving, consenting adults that are choosing to have sex with each other, they haven't caused any harm to each other. That if it's a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, they're not actually causing any harm to each other. That's why the Buddha didn't include it here. If you understand the universal truth of impermanence, it's not possible for everybody to be interested in having sex with the opposite gender. If every woman had sex with a man and every man had sex with a woman, this would be permanent. But if you look around the world around you, everything is impermanent. Everything's constantly changing. There isn't a permanent fixed state. So ever since the beginning of time, human beings have had sex with the opposite gender, but also they've been having sex with the same gender too. There's never been a period of time in history where everybody had sex with the opposite gender. Even during the lifetime of the Buddha, people had sex with the same gender because he talks about it essentially in his teachings. But when he gets to the point where he's talking about sexual misconduct, he doesn't include this because there's no harm involved. There's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, and they haven't made any harmful decisions in this situation. So this is how wise this individual was, that 2,500 years ago, he understood that same gender relationships doesn't cause harm. There's people today that don't understand this, right? Now today, there's certain people who have a craving, a desire. They want every man to have sex with a woman, and they want every woman to have sex with a man. And when their craving isn't getting fulfilled, their anger arises, right? And then where this is coming from is their ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, those three poisons that we talked about just earlier. So if you're someone who prefers same gender relationships, or you know someone who does, it's completely normal. It's been happening since the beginning of time. You're not causing harm to anybody at all. Okay. And then we can also understand transgender individuals from the teachings of the Buddha, that it's not possible for every mind that comes into a body to have the identification of the mind in the same as the sexual organs. So if every single mind identified as the same as the sexual organs of the body, then this would be permanence. That the universal truth of impermanence tells us that that's not possible. So you can have an individual who has physical sexual organs that is of one gender, but their mind identifies in a completely different gender. This is the universal truth of impermanence, that you can see that this is going to happen, and it's been happening since the beginning of time. Even the Buddha talks about this in his teachings. He talks about essentially individuals who are transgender. And if you understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been countless beings in the past, and in those countless existences, we've been different genders at different times. So maybe we were sisters when we were in lizards, right? But now we're maybe a male body and a male mind, but in the past, maybe we were females. And now we come into this life and the mind is identifying with one gender and the body is of a different gender. So remember, the teachings of the Buddha, they're not explaining to you the way the world should be. He's explaining to you the way the world is. So when you look around the world and you see transgender individuals, or you see people who prefer same-gender relationships, this is all normal because we understand the natural laws of existence, of the universal truth of impermanence, and we understand the cycle of rebirth, and you can see that it's completely normal. And just because of people's lack of wisdom, they having craving and they're having anger, and because of their lack of wisdom, this continues to exist. But when you arise wisdom, you can see that this is completely normal. Okay? Some people ask me about masturbation sometimes, because sometimes people are taught that, oh, masturbation is immoral, you should never masturbate, it's so harmful, you should never do it. Well, it's all about how you use it and what you're working towards. Masturbation can be used in beneficial ways, but it can also be destructive too. It's all about how you decide to use it. If you understand your ultimate goal is to decrease your sexual desire and decrease your sensual desire, that's ultimately what you're going towards, because if you continue to be sexually active and you just had sex, lots of sex, when you're having sex, you'll be happy and excited, but when you're not having sex, you'll be agitated and annoyed. So you can get to the second stage of enlightenment and still maintain a very healthy sexual relationship if you like. And some people choose to do that, and you might choose to hang out in the second stage of enlightenment. But ultimately, if you're interested in getting to the complete peace and the complete joy where the mind isn't agitated and annoyed, you'll need to eliminate your sexual desire. When or if you ever choose to do that, it's your choice. It's your journey to enlightenment. Nobody's ever going to tell you to do it. Nobody's ever going to try to force you to do it. It's your choice. But if you're choosing to eliminate your sexual desire, masturbation can actually be helpful in this regard to help you reduce it. And the way that it could help you is, let's just say you're in this talk and maybe you have like maybe 5 or 10 boyfriends or girlfriends, and you're listening to what I'm sharing and you're like, you know what, David, this is kind of wise. I should just have one. This would be much better for me. Well, now maybe you're used to having sex with 5 or 10 different people in a given week. And now when you go down to one partner, maybe there's this sexual craving in your mind. And now if you use a little bit of masturbation, it can help you bring that down to just practicing with having sex with one person. And this is beneficial. Or say somebody was interested in raping an individual and they used masturbation instead. This would actually be a beneficial result, right? But somebody can be masturbating so excessively, maybe 10, 15, 20 times a day, that their mind increases the sensual desire. So this is what you would like to look at if you're using masturbation. Are you using it to decrease your sensual desire, or you're using it to increase it? And if you're decreasing it, it can actually be very beneficial, because as you're eliminating any of these cravings, you might notice that the mind is longing and yearning for something, and the pressure builds up in the mind. So as you're starting to maybe get rid of your sexual cravings, you might go like maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of months without having sex, and you feel this pressure building up in the mind where there's overwhelming urge to have sex. Well, if you use a little bit of masturbation, it can decrease that. It's kind of like a dam. If you ever understood a dam that is holding back water, when the water is coming up the dam, it's getting more and more pressure on the dam, this multi-million-dollar structure. The way that they protect the structure is they open up the dam and it releases some of the water. And then as they release some of the water, they close the dam again. And now it allows the dam to be protected. So it's the same thing with your mind, that if you're noticing this pressure building up in your mind, that, gosh, maybe you really want to have sex really badly, you can use a bit of masturbation to decrease that. It's like letting the water out of the dam. And maybe you went 2 weeks without having sex, and now you use a little bit of masturbation. But now maybe you go 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and now maybe you need to use a little bit more. And now you go 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks without having sex, and you can gradually expand it this way. So in this regard, masturbation can actually be helpful for you. It all depends on how you use it, whether you're decreasing your sensual desire or you're increasing it. And only you're going to know that, and you decide for yourself what you're actually choosing to do. Sex with animals, this is black and white. You know, an animal can't give us consent. I imagine if somebody tried to do that, they could get injured, they could get sexually transmitted diseases, and it's really unwise to do that, right? They can't, this is just black and white. It's really easy to see that one. If you're currently looking at pornography or indulging in that kind of thing, this can be problematic for the mind because it arises sensual desire in the mind. And if you ever go in that direction, you can kind of go into this fantasy world where this sexual activity, looking at pornography, can take the mind into that kind of indulgence. And then even if you try to have sex with an actual human being, you can find that it's maybe not as satisfying anymore because the mind is still in this fantasy world. So if you're interested in having sex, I would encourage you to go towards an actual human being, to a individual who is consenting to having sex with you, have intimacy with an actual person. Whereas if you go in the direction of pornography, the mind can get really attached to that, and it's going to rise your craving and make it hard for you to let that go. So I put a lot of more detail about pornography in the first book, where I explain some of the challenges and difficulties with it. So you can gradually move away from this, and you'll see that your mind will become more calm, more stable, more steady, and you'll even have more confidence. Sometimes when you're indulging in pornography, there's a lack of confidence in the mind sometimes. So you can look in volume 1, chapter 7, and you'll see the details there. Any questions on this particular precept? Sexual misconduct. This is helping you to eliminate and reduce your craving, your desire, your harmful nature around your sex.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about chastity, because I spent some time in a country where basically sex was practically banned outside of marriage. There was that modesty culture, expecting especially women to cover up. And they also had gender segregation to like reinforce chastity. And that country was, for me, it was like hell. It was very violent, very oppressive. So seems like they're practicing the precept of chastity, right? Should be better over there.
The Buddha is not teaching chastity because that would be like one extreme, right? Chastity would be no sex whatsoever. Right? That's what chastity is. Unchastity would be having sex with countless people, like within the same day or the same week and things like this. So what you would like to get to is where you have a loyal, loving, committed relationship with somebody, and now you guys are choosing to have sex with each other. And if that's what you would like to do, you guys have sex. And then you see that relationship through, and your intention is for a long-term, committed, loyal, faithful relationship. But if for some reason this relationship's over, now you end that relationship, and now you decide to move on to another partner if that's what you're choosing to do. That's essentially what the Buddha is teaching you here, is to have one partner at a time. And that's what's going to produce the best results for you.
Got it. But in that society, I'm talking about, that's what they were doing.
In that society, it sounds like the government is imposing rules that says you can only have sex when you're married. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. He's not teaching you to only have sex when you're married.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Question?
I had a question about like transgender. Is there anything about like altering your body in those situations? Like, what would the Buddha say about that?
That didn't exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. If someone's choosing to do that, that's their choice, right? Like, if somebody has any kind of plastic surgery or modifications of the body, that's their choice. Where that's coming from is the craving, desire, attachment in the mind. It's coming from personal existence view. And wherever somebody is in their life, they may or may not decide to do that, right? Like even a tattoo is an alteration of the body. And this is the personal existence view, thinking that this body is me and now I need to do something to it to make it better. Where what you can get to in order to get to this peace and joy is where you realize that this body isn't me. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to maintain it. I'm going to make wise decisions around it, but I don't need to make modifications to it in order to get to peacefulness, because making modifications to it isn't going to necessarily lead to peacefulness. But let me share this also. There's two ways to eliminate a craving, desire, attachment. I think you've heard me share this before. Maybe we were at Taco Bell, is that you can cut it off and let it go, which is what the Buddha is teaching through the breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity in the Eightfold Path. But there's also fulfilling a craving, right? Let's just say somebody had a burning desire to have a tattoo and they always wanted to have a tattoo. And say they were trying to cut it off and let it go and cut it off and let it go, but it just wasn't working. They're just not successful at this. One of the ways to eliminate this craving is just go get a tattoo. But their mind has to be observant of this, because it can be a second one and a third one and a fourth one and a fifth one. If it's just like, all right, I'm just going to go get this one tattoo and I'm done and I'm going to extinguish this craving and this is what I'm going to do, this could potentially be a wise choice for that person. So there could be, say, a transgender individual who their mind identifies as one gender, their body is a different gender, and they just have such a burning desire to have that surgery. And maybe they choose to go do that. And maybe now that is fulfilling a certain craving, and now their mind was able to let it go. But that's ultimately not what's going to make the mind peaceful and joyful, is having the body appear a certain way. What's making the peacefulness and creating the peacefulness is the elimination of the craving. And there's these two different ways to do it. So any kind of surgery, if somebody was having a longing, yearning for it, one of the ways to eliminate it is to actually do it. But in some situations, if someone's interested in letting go and walking more towards eliminating personal existence view, then maybe they might choose not to do that, even though their mind is longing, yearning for it. But it's going to be quite painful walking in this other direction because the mind wants it so bad. But the more that the mind lets go, this will feel peaceful over here. So the Buddha didn't talk about modification of the body, but we can understand it through personal existence view and central desire of what's really going on there. And for some people, they'll be able to cut it off and let it go and walk in that direction, and that would actually ideally be better for them. But for some people, they might need to fulfill it, and then by fulfilling it, their mind will actually be able to let go of it. But the same thing with plastic surgery is some people, they're never happy. It's a nose job, it's a lip job, it's a chin job, it's a facelift, it's just a never-ending craving that never gets satisfied. So the more you can eliminate that, the better for your mind. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're welcome. Okay, so this is the third precept. So let's go on to the fourth one. This one is a bit more straightforward. This is about speech. The Buddha shares abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. So what he's talking about here is not lying, right? And we've learned throughout our life, because every single one of us lied growing up, right? And we can see that it produced unwholesome results. This is where you can see the Buddha's not teaching you rules or commandments. He's showing you this cause and effect, or this action and result, that when we are untruthful, people don't see us as being trustworthy and dependable. And now we experience unwholesome results because of it. Where lying is coming from is the mind's craving, desire, attachment. Remember, the Buddha is guiding you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, because that's what's causing your discontentedness. When an individual is lying, there's something that they want. And if they tell the truth, they're not going to get it. And by lying, they feel like they can get what they want. So when you are eliminating craving, desire, attachment, you're learning to speak the truth. Now, not only can you be a true speaker, one to be relied on and dependable and trustworthy, but you can be eliminating your cravings, desires, attachments, where you're just always speaking the truth. Because if you're looking to get to this peaceful and joyful mental state, you're also looking to get to a peaceful and joyful life. Well, if you've been lying a lot, if you've ever done a lot of lying, you can see that your mind wasn't peaceful and joyful. You had to constantly remember, what did I tell this person? What did I tell this person? What did I tell that person? Your mind was obsessively trying to figure this out. So the Buddha understood this so well that not only did he teach this precept, that it would be unwise to lie, but he has this other teaching that I've included here, where he's teaching his son. Sometimes people think the Buddha left his family and he never came back, but he actually went back to his family in the region of the world where his family was, and his family actually joined him. His son, his wife, his mother-in-law, his stepmother, different people like this, they came and ordained with him to be students. So here he's teaching his son, and he's explaining to his son that he doesn't even tell a joke as a lie, or a lie as a joke. That even when he's joking, he tells the truth. That's how wise the Buddha was and how deep he was practicing his teachings. That when he was telling jokes, he would tell the truth. You guys might not associate a Buddha with someone who tells jokes, but a Buddha tells jokes, right? They're having fun. An enlightened being is going to have fun and enjoyment. Oftentimes you see these pictures of the Buddha sitting in meditation looking all solemn, and you might think that the Buddha was just sitting in meditation his whole life and always solemn. That's not the way an enlightened being is. Yeah, they meditate, but they have lots of fun and lots of enjoyment as well. So a Buddha is going to tell jokes. An enlightened being is going to tell jokes. But when they tell jokes, they tell the truth, right? It's a lot more challenging to tell jokes that are truthful, but oftentimes they're a lot funnier because it takes a lot more wisdom to put together a joke that's actually truthful. If you can imagine this individual who's deeply understanding the wisdom of what it takes to get to enlightenment, where he's in a class like this and sharing the truth, but if on the side he was joking and lying, while he was joking and lying, his students would never be able to know whether he's actually telling the truth in the classes or not, right? So the Buddha understood that he was a role model and he needed to exhibit this wise practice, and he needed to deeply practice the teachings where even when he jokes, he doesn't lie. So that way people would understand that he's always telling the truth. So you could develop that if you like in your life, where you're always telling the truth. And what you'll find is people will see you as dependable and trustworthy and committed, and you're able to have great personal and professional relationships. So any questions on this one? You have a question, Frank?
So then with like stand-up comedians, right, who kind of are constantly creating different scenarios to almost like highlight a certain, I don't know, witty analogy or something, right? Because it's known to be, most of the time it's known to be like, hey, I'm just creating a scenario just to kind of demonstrate for this joke. Is that like, does that kind of violate this one precept then?
It would, but there's ways to do that while still telling the truth, right? There's comedians out there that don't lie. They tell the truth and they explain real situations that they're in, and they're telling the truth. But in those situations where comedians are lying, oftentimes in their personal life, people have a hard time to know whether they're telling the truth or not, right? Because they're telling a story, and now it's like, whoa, should I believe this person or not? Like, what's going on here? What's this person doing? Mm-hmm. So that's the impact that they're experiencing, that because of the choice to tell jokes that are lies, then people aren't going to know whether to take them seriously or not in other parts of their life. And that's for them to decide to do. But if I was a comedian, which I'm not, but if I was, I would choose to tell the truth, and I would have to work really good at that skill and that craft. And those types of comedians are typically even more funny, right? Because they're so wise at being able to tell jokes that are truthful.
Does it also kind of go against the part of the Eightfold Path in regards to right speech and like frivolous speech?
Yeah, not frivolous speech necessarily, but here, this one is plugging into the Eightfold Path. Frivolous speech would be like idle chatter, unpurposeful, unbeneficial speech. But in a situation where you're performing as a comedian, that's not frivolous speech because that's what people are there for. It's a performance. It's a show.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, so now the very last one, the last precept, which is one that is helpful to understand, because if you're doing this one, you're more likely to do all the others. What this one is all about is about avoiding putting substances into the body that is producing heedlessness. Here, the Buddha shares refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. What this is helping you to understand that by putting a substance in the body, that it's going to promote a lack of attentiveness, a lack of awareness, unmindfulness in the mind. And when you have this lack of awareness, you're going to be more likely to kill, to steal, to have sexual misconduct, and to lie. And now you're making unwise decisions. So when you're investigating the teachings of the Buddha, like I share here, if there's something you come across that you're not familiar with, you should investigate it. So this word heedlessness isn't a word that we typically use in day-to-day life. So if you go look at this up, it means careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, or unmindful. That's what heedlessness is. Okay? So here, if you're putting any kind of substance in the body that's promoting that, now you're not going to have awareness of mind. So how could you purify your mind and train your mind to cultivate wisdom and practice wholesome mental qualities if your mind is heedless in practicing this careless, thoughtless inattentiveness? You're not actually making wise decisions. If you go to a place like a prison and you talk to people who are in prison, they might tell you that they're there for murder or they're there for robbing a bank or something like this. But if you really talk to them in detail, about 80% of them will tell you the real reason why they're there is because of substances that cause heedlessness. They might have been caught for murder. They might have been caught for robbing a bank, but they would have never murdered that person if they weren't high on drugs, or they would have never robbed that bank if they didn't have a habit that they were trying to support, right? So oftentimes these substances that cause heedlessness are promoting all kinds of unskillful conduct that leads to unwholesome results. So some things that you would like to think about, because it's not black and white in all situations, are things like marijuana. Marijuana has some medical benefits to it. We can see this very clearly, that there's children who have seizures, and maybe they have 20 seizures a day, and they give them a little bit of CBD oil on their tongue. They don't have another seizure for like 6 months. You can see these kinds of things in the news, right? Well, if someone's doing that, this could be using this plant for medical purposes. They're not using it for heedlessness. But this plant can also be used for heedlessness, right? This is where only you are going to know what you're using the plant for. So if you are using the plant for medical purposes, normally you're looking for a high CBD in a very low THC. This is the two sides of the plant. The CBD is attributed to the medical properties, where the THC of the plant, this is the high that produces the high. And also, if you're looking for medical benefits, you're usually going to ingest it as an oil or an edible. Whereas if you're smoking it, it's going to damage your lungs. This is the unwholesome results of having done that. And you need to look at the purpose for taking marijuana. If you're taking marijuana for like stress or anxiety, this isn't going to solve that. Stress and anxiety is being caused by craving, desire, attachment. You need to eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments, and that's what will eliminate your stress and anxiety. The marijuana is not going to eliminate your stress and anxiety. It's just going to cover it up and kind of push it away. So there is the ability to use something like this in a helpful way. You just need to be attentive to how you're using it. And this is something you would like to look at. Cigarettes are something that we know doesn't have any medical benefits, and this is more and more people are moving away from cigarettes, and they've learned this through the difficult challenges to the health. And the cigarettes, there's no medical benefit whatsoever, and this is why people have been moving away from it more and more. You need to pay attention to prescription medications, because there's some prescription medications that can be addictive and someone can use them for heedlessness. So if you're getting a certain prescription from a doctor, I suggest that you research that and try to understand if it's addictive or not. And if it's addictive, you might ask your doctor if there's another option besides that one. And there might be a certain option besides that one that you could take that is not as addictive. But in some situations, there might just be one medication that you need, and that's the one that the doctor is prescribing for you. And if you know that it's addictive, you would like to probably get rid of it as soon as possible. Use it for a limited period of time, whatever amount of time you need it for, but then get rid of it as soon as possible so that the mind doesn't get addicted to it. So you'll need to pay attention to that. You need to even pay attention to any caffeine, because this is a drug, this is a stimulant. It'll take your mind up into this excited state, and then you'll kind of drop off and you'll lose your energy. By the time you get to enlightenment, you'll have sustainable energy all through your day, not based on any substance, that it'll be permanent energy. But your mind will never get the ability to cultivate that energy if you rely on a substance like caffeine. So if you put caffeine into the body, sure, you're going to get energy for a period of time, but then you'll drop off, and your mind never had the opportunity to cultivate this naturally. So if you gradually purge the caffeine out of your life, you'll notice that your mind will actually perform better. So if you're having trouble sleeping, or your mind is overactive or excited or anything like this, getting rid of caffeine will really help you with that. And as you're getting rid of caffeine, you might actually experience withdrawal symptoms, just like a person who's addicted to heroin or cocaine or some other drug might go through withdrawal symptoms. When you're going through the elimination of caffeine, let those withdrawal symptoms remind you that you are detoxing from a drug. And it might be 3 days or a week or two that you experience this, but once you get over the hump, you'll eventually be away from that substance. And then your mind can cultivate this natural energy. You even need to pay attention to sugar intake. If you took sugar excessively, that can produce a high too. So you need to pay attention to that. And usually by the time we get to this age, we're already there, but just something to pay attention to. Sometimes people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to produce improvement in helping you to get to enlightenment, but this isn't actually true. What psychedelic substances do is it does help you look inward and be introspective, but it's only based on this particular substance. In order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to cultivate that naturally because you're not going to be able to rely on a substance every time you need to be introspective. So if you relied on a substance to be introspective and look inward, then you're not able to cultivate that in your mind naturally. So some people might talk about ayahuasca or psychedelic mushrooms or LSD or things like this. And while people have used these things at different times, and there's kind of like an appearance as if the mind's looking inward, because it is, the way that I think about these psychedelic substances is it's kind of like you're walking down the street and you're looking in through the window of a shop and you see this beautiful purse or this beautiful handbag inside the store, but you can't ever go in and actually touch it. It's like you're chained down to the sidewalk. It's like you can see the purse, you can see that it's a nice bag, you know that it'd probably be really nice for you to have that bag, but as long as you're taking those psychedelic substances, you can't ever go in and actually touch it and feel it and experience it. And the same thing is true about enlightenment, that these psychedelic substances can kind of appear a little bit like, yeah, I can see this more introspection that's going on, but you can't actually touch it and feel it and experience enlightenment as long as you're relying on a psychedelic substance. So this is just something to keep in mind as you're out and about and seeing different people talk about psychedelic substances, that these actually don't lead to enlightenment. It's actually keeping you chained down to the sidewalk where you can't go in and actually touch and feel and experience enlightenment itself, because the mind is relying on this substance rather than cultivating this introspection naturally. Because all throughout your day, there can be any number of situations that occur, and you're going to need to be introspective. You're going to need to be able to look inward. And you can't be like, oh, Mom, hold on a second. I know we're having this problem. Let me take a little bit of LSD and I'll be back to you. Let me have this introspection time. Right? You're going to need to be able to cultivate that internally so that you can be introspective at all times. Okay, so any questions on this at all? Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
I'm like watching, I'm looking at the slide and I'm thinking about all the times I brought in like tea in a bottle and kind of laughing about it. But tea itself, I mean, compared to coffee, the experience that I've had with coffee is that it does sometimes kind of give me the jitters, and, there's definitely that kind of rise and fall with like an espresso, for example, right? But I mean, with tea, like it has so many like health benefits as well, right? So is that necessarily not helpful to consume tea, even though it has caffeine and it's much slower release than an espresso?
Yeah, I don't suggest that you have any caffeine whatsoever, even in tea. Even a lighter caffeine, it's still a stimulant. It's still going into the body. You need to be able to look at liquid going into the body as what is the purpose of this liquid going into the body? And that's to hydrate the body. And as long as you're putting something else that's doing something other than that, then the mind is just pursuing its craving, desire, attachment, because there's no medical need to have caffeine going into the body. But the mind will oftentimes be interested to hold on to these kinds of things. So if you're ingesting like lemongrass tea, there's no caffeine in that. You could actually ingest that, or like ginger tea or turmeric tea. There's these kinds of things that if you like warm, hot drinks that have some kind of herb in it, you could drink those kinds of things without caffeine. You wouldn't need the caffeine. The more that you detox from caffeine, your mind will actually become more sensitive to it, just like alcohol. Like the first time you ever drink alcohol, 1 or 2 drinks sent you over the top kind of thing, where after you've been drinking regularly, it doesn't have the same effect. And the same thing is like if you're drinking a lot of caffeine, you need more and more of it to have the effect. But on the other side, when you're walking away from caffeine and you're eliminating it, your mind can actually become a lot more sensitive to it, to the point where a few years ago, I had a little sip of a hot cocoa, and I saw that I didn't know that cocoa had caffeine in it, but I took a sip and I was like, whoa, that was like pretty strong. And I looked online right there in the cafe, and it said that cocoa has 1/8 of a cup of coffee, the same caffeine. And I used to drink, 3, 4, 5 cups of coffee a day at one time, and it was no big deal. But just this little sip of 1/8 of the amount of caffeine that a cup of coffee has, I could really notice it because my mind had been away from caffeine for so long. So what you might notice is that your mind becomes more sensitive to it, and you would like to be able to, if you choose, purge all the caffeine from your intake so that you can get to the point where you just are developing introspection naturally, and you don't have this substance or this stimulant that is promoting this overactive mind.
Yep. Sorry. And then I guess with the psychedelic substances, I mean, I get the desire to not rely on substances for enlightenment or feeling like an extra special experience of life. Mm-hmm. But then what about all the like kind of microdosing studies and that kind of thing where because I think when I first read this, I was thinking about like, things that cause heedlessness, carelessness, right? Whereas I feel like caffeine and a bit of microdosing actually adds to a certain sharpness of mind for that duration. I get we don't want to depend on it, but it almost kind of offers a glimpse into, what sharpness that experience is like.
Yeah, if somebody chooses to do that, that's their choice. An enlightened being isn't going to need any of that stuff, right? Because their mind has been cultivated and trained to be able to have sharpness and concentration and clarity and introspection. As long as an individual is relying on a substance for that, for any amount of time, even once a year, the mind hasn't been able to cultivate that internally and be able to have that naturally for themselves. So an enlightened being isn't going to need caffeine. They're not going to need psychedelic substances. They would have purged all that out of their life. And now their mind is performing optimally just based on the way it performs. It's not going to need any of this stuff. But whether someone chooses to do that stuff or not, totally up to them. Right. But the mind can get into those kinds of things. And now it's not cultivating the qualities that it actually needs to have that itself naturally on board.
Cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share my story with caffeine from today. Today is my second day without coffee, and I'm used to waking up, and that's the first thing I do. Mm-hmm. And I woke up this morning, and my mind and my ego were being an absolute tyrant because I've taken so much from it in the last week. Mm-hmm. And this morning, I was in a foul mood. And my ego was like, do this, do this, do this. And I was like, no. And I took everything from her this morning that she was demanding from me, including coffee, because she was like, well, you've taken all this from me. At least I can have a cup of coffee. It's not going to hurt anyone, like really trying to talk me into it. And I was like, no, I'm not giving you that either. And I know for a fact that if I had had that coffee, there's no way that I would have been able to shut her up. And I didn't give it to her. And then when I got here after the first meditation, I feel so much better. I'm not having all of those spiraling thoughts anymore, beating myself up, letting the ego kind of take over. And I know that if I had had the coffee, I wouldn't be able to keep that quiet like it is now.
Good. Yeah, what you can do to remind yourself during that time when that craving's coming up is remind yourself that this craving is impermanent. It will dissipate, but it'll come back up again, right? It's going to come back up tomorrow or the next day or the next day. But when that craving's coming up, just keep reminding yourself this is impermanent. And that's where oftentimes redirecting the mind can be really good. Like go get a fruit smoothie or go for a bike ride or something like that, or do some meditation like you did. That'll really help you to get over the hump of that craving. And now on the other side, you'll feel so much better. So that's where I talk about you got to walk through the fire to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. So right now you got a bit of fresh air, but don't be surprised if the fire comes, right? And then now, all right, this fire is impermanent. Let me just keep walking towards the fresh air. Yep. Okay, so this is everything that I have to share on the 5 precepts. Usually what I do is I teach to a certain level of detail and then just wait for you guys to ask questions to go deeper into it. You can really start to explore these in more and more detail, and then applying them to your life is where you're going to experience the most benefits. As I mentioned, it's cultivating the wisdom and then realizing that it's not black and white, right? Like sometimes people translate these. They say that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants. That doesn't really give you much information. That sounds like a bunch of rules. It sounds like black and white. As you can see, the Buddha didn't teach that way. He used much more illuminating language than that, because that's what you need to be able to understand this and practice it. So you can learn more about this in the book chapter 7 is what I've been teaching here. And I've been teaching this and recording this many, many times. So I've done many talks on this, and there's different questions that come up in each one of these talks. But if you're ever struggling and you ever need help, you can always reach out to me and share with me any particular decision that you're thinking about making. I will share with you. I won't tell you how to make that decision. It's up to you to make your own decisions, but I can share with you the natural law of Kamma to help you understand and be more informed before you make a decision. And then what you choose to do is totally up to you. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest in learning. If you would like to come back this afternoon to learn walking meditation, we're going to take a lunch break here. It's a little bit after 12. Would you guys like a little bit longer lunch today? Because normally we come back at 2 o'clock for the walking meditation, but we could come back kind of at our normal time and then actually finish up a little bit early today if you guys like. You guys would like to finish up earlier, or would you like to have a longer lunch break? Nobody's going to say? Okay.
Well, the longer lunch break helps me because I might be back in time.
Oh, right, because you're going to immigration. Okay. So right now it's 10 minutes after 12. If we did our normal lunch break, we would come back at 1:40, and then we would be finished probably around 2:40 or even 2:30. That's normally when we would finish. It's not going to make a difference, right? Okay, so why don't we take our hour-and-a-half lunch break, come back at 1:40, and then from there I'll teach you guys walking meditation. Okay, so enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you guys after our lunch. Okay, we'll see you next time.